On today's programme.
Parliament will sit there tonight and vote no matter how late it goes. No ifs, no buts. These flights are going to Rwanda.
But will Rwanda flights stop the boats? This former Home Secretary doesn't think so.
One flight here or there with a few passengers on it will not provide the deterrent effect that is necessary to break the people smuggling gangs.
Calls for the Met Police Chief to resign after this encounter between a police officer and an anti-Semitism campaigner. After the allegations over the misuse of campaign funds, Mark Menzies resigns from the Conservative Party, but will remain an MP until the general election. And remember this?
It's right that we've been able to take back control of our borders and of immigration.
But could EU freedom of movement for young people be reintroduced? Joining me to discuss all that, Conservative MP Bob Seeley, Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Baroness Jenny Chapman, Politico's Deputy UK Editor Rosa Prince, and Ella Whelan from the Academy of Ideas. This is Politics Live. But let's start with this headline in BBC News. Ukraine-Russia war. US House passes crucial aid deal worth $61 billion. Yes, after some delay, as some see it, there will be this aid deal going to Ukraine in terms of US military aid to help combat Russia's invasion. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, described the US support as vital. Will it be a game changer, though, Bob, in terms of the course of the war?
I'm going to turn that around, and I'm going to say it's not going to be a game changer. If that kit hadn't come through, if the ammunition wasn't coming, you would have seen the Ukrainians under really significant pressure over the summer. There is a big Russian offensive coming in June, and if there isn't, well, I was out east in eastern Ukraine a few weeks ago now. There used to be an artillery imbalance of about 1 to 7. It's gone up to about 1 to 15. So every incoming shell, there's 15 of them before the Ukrainians think that they can loose off a couple of shells going in the other direction or target their enemies. So anything that can even out that huge imbalance can help the Ukrainians hold their positions. Whether that means they can take ground going forward, this is another matter, and you're looking at other things like F-16s, long-range missiles,
right.
How you're combining arms.
Sure, but the broad principle. I mean, it does follow. I mean, there have been a couple. Yeah, there have been a couple of important figures militarily who've said that without the additional aid, Ukraine could lose the war to Russia by the end of this year. Bob Seeley thinks they'll at least have a chance of holding the line. Do you think that amount of military aid from the US could change the course of the war?
Well, we need to change the course of the war. We need to make sure that Ukraine emerges from this with an outcome that secures their geographical integrity. You're not going to find any difference between Bob and I on this. It's hugely important that Russia is defeated. What message does it send to the rest of the world if they are not? You know, this is something where we need to stand firm, cross-party and with our international allies.
Is it a game changer, though, Rosa?
Well, the problem is that this was such a difficult passage through Congress. At times over the last few months, it's looked like it might not make it through the House of Representatives. And with Donald Trump perhaps on course for victory again, it could be that we get through the summer and then we start to have another conversation about this with a different president in the White House who might take a very different view. So it certainly staves things off for a couple of months. Longer term, I'm not sure it makes a huge amount of difference.
Do you think it might change the course of the war in terms of being favourable to the Ukrainians?
Well, not if Russia intensifies, which there's every possibility that that will happen. I think the delay in this getting through really reinforces the idea that America is in favour of Ukraine not losing rather than them winning. And that's actually a very important difference because there is sort of an unwillingness to really bang the drum for the issue of sovereignty. And, you know, it gets talked about in the discussions in Congress. Most of it was sort of, maybe it's unfair to say navel gazing, but about the effect domestically in America, which is important, and I'm not dismissing that. But there wasn't enough sort of hardline commitment to the big picture of what it means for a state to protect its own borders and have its own freedom, I think we would do talking about that internationally a bit more.
How much of this is an indication, then, Bob, that there will be a negotiated settlement eventually?
Look, sad to say, I think that is the most likely outcome if Russia can't win. Just a couple of points, and just on the point that Ella raises, the EU and the UK have got to raise their games as well, because the EU promised 1 million shells last year, about 350,000 arrived. That is just chronically awful. And although we are delivering on our pledges, actually we need to be delivering more ourselves. And I think the really important thing for me, again, which I hope we can all agree in, is that you need transparency in supply. It's no good just keep on raiding the larder when the larder is getting really increasingly threadbare. We need to know, we need to have a really clear guarantee of an idea of how many production lines there are, not only for shells, but also for machine tools, because the Ukrainians are now losing hundreds of artillery barrels because they're reaching the end of their productive lives, and they either need to be scrapped and new ones or they need to be retooled.
Let's talk about the Rwanda bill, because the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has given a press conference this morning saying that he promises to keep going through the night in terms of the parliamentary passage of the Rwanda bill, if necessary, and he's not going to allow unelected lords to stop it any longer. Let's have a listen to part of what he had to say.
We are ready, plans are in place, and these flights will go come what may. No foreign court will stop us from getting flights off. The first flight will leave in 10 to 12 weeks. Now, of course, that is later than we wanted, but we have always been clear that processing will take time, and if Labour peers had not spent weeks holding up the bill in the House of Lords to try to block these flights altogether, we would have begun this process weeks ago.
Well, Jenny Chapman, he's talking about you.
He does, I know. I mean, when Rishi talks tough, those people traffickers, they really start to worry, don't they? I mean, the issue about the Lords is we could have had this completed weeks ago. It's the government that sets the timetable. We're doing what's called ping pong tonight, which is where there's a tussle between the Commons and the Lords. We could have done this last week. You know, the government decides when things are timetabled. They've chosen that we'll do it today. That's fine. We will get it resolved today. And there are a couple of issues left to iron out. One is about Afghans who helped our forces and who most people would say actually should be able to come and stay here, to making sure that they don't get sent to Rwanda. And another one is about the process of establishing the safety of Rwanda. That's all we've got left now to argue about. It's a couple of votes. I think that Rishi Sunak is really trying to make this into as big a thing as he possibly can to make him look tough. I don't genuinely think the public is buying it. And then after that, there will still be an issue about the substance of it. And you saw Suella Braverman, of all people, today saying that this really is not going to have the impact that Rishi Sunak is pretending. It is a gimmick. It's very expensive.
Well, let's just
and we just don't think it's going to work.
Well, let's just stick first of all with what's going on through Parliament. Clearly blaming Labour Lords. Crossbenchers also have been unhappy about it. Bob, do you accept that?
Parliament's agenda is set by government in conjunction with other political parties. So
is it?
I don't think, yes, it is. And
well, the timetable set by the government, Bob, you know that.
Timetable, parliamentary business is set by government in conjunction with other parties. That's how it works. And that's why the leader of the House and the shadow leader of the House talk. So to say it's all government's fault is not true.
But we could have done this last week.
You are desperate to stop this bill because you are desperate that it is going to work. Why have you voted against illegal immigration measures 100 times since 2019?
Well, we could have done this last week.
Why have you voted against illegal immigration measures 100 times?
We could have had this completed last week. Okay. We will vote for measures that will work, but this is a gimmick, and even Tories are saying it isn't going to work.
You voted against
we don't have a majority in the Lords. The balance is made up by crossbenchers. It could have been done already. If we thought this was going to work, if this was genuinely a bill that was going to have the impact of stopping people getting in boats and crossing the channel, excuse me, Bob,
you really don't want this to work.
We desperately want this to work. We desperately want this to work. Of course we do. It's appalling that people getting into boats to cross the channel, dying, trying to get to our shores.
So you support the Rwanda bill?
That should not be happening.
So you support the Rwanda bill?
We will support things that will stop that happening. But this Rwanda thing, it's costing £500 million. It's going to deal with, at best, 300 people. You had thousands getting into boats over one weekend. We just got to get serious about this.
All right. I mean, Rosa, in terms of who's sort of right about who's been holding up what, where do you sit?
Well, look, it was described as emergency legislation, I think, back in December, and we're here now. The government repeatedly said they wanted the planes off the ground in the spring. That's not going to happen. I mean, the Prime Minister's is obviously, it's a strategy to try to blame the Labour Party. But Jenny's right to say it's not just the Labour Party that's holding things up. There are a lot of crossbenchers. There are actually a lot of Conservative peers who are not that keen on this legislation. If the government could get out all those peers and get them away from their country manners and so on a Monday evening, they could probably pass it, no problem. But I think it's interesting that last time around there wasn't a very big number of them turning out.
I mean, Ellen, this phrase, will of the people, which you hear from time to time, and I think Rishi Sunak used it again, that this is being blocked, this is being stopped. What do you make of that?
Well, look, you don't have to sit up all night watching Parliament TV, which I unfortunately sometimes do, to know that a lot of the rhetoric used in the Lords is like what you just said, Jenny, that it's generally anti the bill. This is a gimmick, or worse, this is immoral. It's, they're very clearly expressing an anti-Rwanda bill opinion.
Which is their right.
Which is their right, that's fine. I myself am not a fan at all of the bill. I think it's stupid. I think it isn't going to work, and I think it's got nothing, it is gimmicky. However, I absolutely prefer bad law instituted by elected people who are elected, who are answerable to their constituents, rather than what someone might imagine to be a better law concocted by people who have no accountability. I mean, Jenny, you keep using the word we. Who are you referring to, you and your friends in the Lords, which is fine. It's an institution that I think should be abolished. You want it to continue. But you have no democratic accountability, which means that it's almost a little bit in bad taste that you're going on at this point blocking the bill. I think just to people who aren't in the Westminster bubble, who care about immigration, who think it's an issue that's important, whether or not they support the Rwanda plan, it does look like an affront to the will of the people, and that's a big problem.
I mean, you don't know what I think about Lords reforms. You've made some quite big assumptions.
All right, well, would you abolish it? I don't know. Join me in that.
The point that I would make is we have the system that we have. It's a bicameral system. The Lords is a revising chamber. Our job, until there is any kind of reform or change, is to revise bills. We're doing what the Commons has asked us to do, which is to look at this, which we do every day. We're making suggestions, there will be a vote. And in the end, as you quite rightly say, and I completely agree with you, the elected House, of which I was a member for almost 10 years, will prevail. And that is absolutely right that happens. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a process where people who've been, yes, appointed, because they have been people like Doreen Lawrence, people like Robert Winston, people like Tanni Grey-Thompson, who bring great expertise and insight, can say to the government on bills, we think that actually it'd be more workable if you did it this way or that way. That's how it works. And that is all we're doing.
I'm aware of how the House of Lords works, but thank you for that explanation. I mean, for me, it comes down to the fact that as much as I might admire individuals like Doreen Lawrence, I think that average Joe and Jane out on the street should have more of a say through the parliamentary process of electing politicians and doing it that way. I mean, look, I'm for abolishing the Lords completely, so that's my position. But I think even if you're not that hard line on the democracy issue, it's clear that from the get-go there has been a sort of salacious desire within the Lords. Just judging by some of the speeches, they're really riled up about this.
Well,
and
some are.
These are people who, the Lords of often, they talk about themselves as guardians of the law, as you described, full of expertise, very lofty. And, the recent sort of political rows, whether it's sort of civil liberties being cracked down on throughout lockdown, free speech issues and attacks on free speech on the online safety bill, democracy is a word that the Lords does not understand or seems to not understand, and that's a problem in there.
I have no salacious desires ever. Thank you, Jess.
Well, thanks for putting that on the record.
All I would say is that the majority of people, there may be one or two people in the Lords who are as Ella describes, but the vast majority of people that I've come across, and since I've been there, my experience is that actually they're very respectful of the predominance of the elected chamber, and we value that, and we know our place in the scheme of things, and it is the Commons that will prevail in the end, and that's completely right.
Well, and actually, Bob, Jenny has a point in terms of the role of the Lords is to improve legislation. Scrutinise and improve. And wouldn't this be an improvement? The Guardian headline, Sunak pressed to end Rwanda bill impasse by exempting Afghan service veterans. Why doesn't the government, why don't you just back that amendment, let it go through? It seems eminently sensible.
There's two amendments that we're talking about.
Yeah, let's just do on this one and I'll come to the monitoring thing.
I'll come to both in a sec,
Okay.
but the principle that Ella's talking about is correct. And what is frustrating us is that we've already voted against these amendments from the Lords. So they're just bringing up something again, which we've already voted against and which we will vote for against again.
Yeah.
There is no point doing this, and I think that is where Ella's got a really good point
so you
about
can't be persuaded.
salacious desires of the Lords.
But you can't be persuaded
No,
about
and I'll tell you why.
exemptions.
I'll tell you why. Look, I served with Afghan interpreters. I was out in Afghan a few times for sort of anything from like 4 months to 4 weeks on bits and pieces of tours out there, and I've worked with some really great Afghan people. Any draw that brings illegal migrants via the Channel crossings will be abused by the traffickers. And you can guarantee, let me just finish the point, you can guarantee that if this is an opt-out, you're providing a route, an illegal route to this country, and tens of thousands of people will be turning up, as they have over the last few years, saying, I served with the British Forces, I was in Nadi Ali in 2002, or 2012 or 2013, and my brother was killed and I've lost my papers, and they will just churn up the system, and you will have lawyers all over them for months and years.
All right. Well, Jenny, do you want to respond to? Do you want to respond to that
Can I just
point?
make one other point?
Briefly.
There are 9 safe and legal routes into this country. When the left say, "Oh, there's no safe and legal routes,"
all right, and one of them includes
9.
Arab, which is a
there are 2
safe
Afghan safe and legal routes.
And are they fully functioning? Are they?
We've taken in 25,000 Afghans. That is quite a lot of people. 25,000.
But anyway,
we've
yeah.
taken in 25,000.
All right. Well, let Jenny answer the point on that.
So I think if Bob reads the revised amendment that's being placed by a former Defence Secretary who works very closely with veterans and with people serving now, he's saying that actually it should be people who've been on the British payroll, who can be easily identified. Those people should have a protection from being sent to Rwanda. That it's very, very narrow what is being proposed. And there are a lot of Tories who speak to privately who do not understand why the government is holding out on this one narrow issue. But as we've already discussed, there will be votes tonight that we could have had last week. We've been really happy to have done this last week. It could have been done and dusted. That is not where we are. We'll go through this tonight. We will have the debates, have the arguments. The government may choose to listen. It may not. Let's see what happens tonight. It's one night.
Right.
But the main point that Bob makes, the main point that Bob makes is that he thinks that there is a chance that these flights are not actually going to be the deterrent that the government wants them to be. And I think he's absolutely right about that.
I didn't say that.
These flights are not going to deter people. There will still be thousands of people coming across the channel. It's going to be a disaster. It's costing £500 million that should be spent on dealing with the criminal gangs. That's what the priority ought to be.
We are dealing with
Just
the criminal
final.
gangs.
All right.
We are dealing with the criminal gangs, and we brought in legislation, and at every turn that you have opposed it, and now we're bringing in more legislation.
Because it's not worked, Bob.
The illegal migration has dropped 30% last year, where it's going up 80 to 100% in most European countries.
Right, but that was different. That was a separate deal, of course,
Easter.
with Albania. We're going to talk about something else because you saw in the headlines an encounter between a Jewish man and a Metropolitan Police officer at the side of a pro-Palestinian march. This is the front page of the Daily Mail. It says Jewish leaders call on Met chief to quit. The Met have apologised after an officer described the chief executive of Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, Gideon Falter, as openly Jewish as he was trying to persuade him not to cross the path of the march. Let's just watch part of a video clip from the police officer's interaction with Mr. Falter. Happened on the 13th of April.
If I can ask you to stay there, please. Thank you very much. I know, I heard you. Well, in that case, sir, when the crowd is gone, I will help you escort you out. No, sir. You are quite openly Jewish. This is a pro-Palestinian march. I'm not accusing you of anything, but I'm worried about the reaction to your presence.
Now, that is part of a 13-minute video or clip of the incident, which Sky News got hold of. We can't show you the full clip because we don't have the time on the programme, but it does give some more context if you want to look at it. Now, since then, Gideon Falter, as we've said, has called on Sir Mark Rowley, the Metropolitan Police Chief, to resign. He said, and this was part of his statement, "I was being treated as a criminal for being Jewish. And after we were being stopped by the police, people started shouting abuse at us. The police surrounded us, not them. They told us we were threatened by arrest, not them." And after 6 months of Sir Mark Rowley's Metropolitan Police deciding to curtail the rights of law-abiding Londoners, including the Jewish community, to appease lawless mobs, I think it's time for Sir Mark Rowley to go. Now, during the press conference that we were talking about on Rwanda, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was asked if he has confidence in Sir Mark Rowley, and this is what he had to say.
I share the shock and the anger that many are feeling when they saw the clips over the weekend. And, you know, what I would say about Mark Rowley and the police, they do have a difficult job. Of course, I appreciate that. But what happened was clearly wrong. And it's right that they've apologised for that. And yes, I do have confidence in him, but that's on the basis that he works to rebuild the confidence and trust of not just the Jewish community, but the wider public, particularly people in London, but more broadly.
What do you think, Bob? Should Sir Mark Rowley go?
No, I don't. I just think whether it's in politics or whether it's in life or certainly in policing, I think people need to learn from their mistakes and be given a chance to learn. I think this is a really tasteless to basically say you're Jewish, you're in the way of a group of people who may obviously try to take action against you or endanger you or cause a fracas because of your Jewishness. So clearly that is just wrong. But actually we need to help the Met Police better. And the way that you do that is not by demanding people's heads every 5 seconds. It's getting them to raise their game, showing them support and actually engaging with them. There is an issue about these Hamas protests. I think a lot of them are in...
Pro-Palestinian marches aren't necessarily Hamas protests.
Right. Pro-Palestinian, some of which has a sort of pro-Hamas tinge. I think some of which is done is in really grotesque bad taste, if it is legal.
Do you think they should be stopped, the marches?
No, and this is... Look, I think we're getting ourselves into a mess in this country. Free speech means... offending other people who are offended by what you have to say.
All right, Jenny, do you think Sir Mark Rowley should go?
I think he needs to fix this. I think he should stay, and I think he should fix it. I think it was appalling what we've seen. Those clips were dreadful, and that young man should have been able to go about his business in central London, as should everybody. And the issue is with the people on those marches, the very, very small minority, who are doing and saying things and behaving in a way that makes people feel unsafe. That should not be tolerated. But Mark Rowley needs to fix this. I watched that and you feel devastated.
Yeah,
for Jewish people who are being put in that position.
I mean, it's interesting. The former chief superintendent of the Met Police, Dale Babu, told BBC Breakfast that actually when he saw the full video, 13 minutes of that interaction and the continued conversation between Gideon Falter and the Metropolitan Police officer, it showed a totally different encounter to the one that Mr. Falter had reported. And I think at one point went even further and said I would have been inclined to have arrested him for assault on a police officer and breach of the peace. Where are you, Ella?
No, I think that it was quite clearly an expression of cultural low-level anti-Semitism, which is that Jews are most likely to be the problem. And well, at least that's the sort of perception that on a, as Bob says, on a march that has, unfortunately, it's not that small a minority. It's certainly not the entirety of pro-Palestine marches are pro-Hamas. But there's enough of a presence there where you think people should, at this point, know better. There should be, I wish there was a much more anti-Hamas presence, openly anti and proud anti-Hamas presence on those pro-Palestine marches. But it's important to note that the police didn't just apologise once, they had to apologise twice. Because the initial apology was disgusting in itself. The initial apology pretty much doubled down and said, well, if you are going to be one of these kind of naughty Jews coming around and causing trouble, what are we meant to do about it? And so I think there's, you've had people, an individual arrested for holding up a sign saying Hamas are terrorists. And that was in a situation in which there was some pretty rowdy, bordering on the sort of public disturbance, legal side of things, behaviour from a pro-Palestine march. So I think that I'm absolutely in favour of an absolutist position on free speech. I think Braverman and all these other politicians who are calling out for them to be banned are absolutely wrong and have no right to impinge on people's political freedoms in that way. They should be allowed to happen. They should be policed properly. And I think that this is the most important thing. The police seem to think they have to intervene into political rows. That's not their business. That's not what they should be doing. They should simply be focused on stopping physical violence, intimidation, the stuff of proper policing, rather than getting involved in whether someone looks openly Jewish or not and whether he might be Antigonist. It's none of your business. Let the man walk where he needs to walk.
Right. I mean, the police, of course, would also say they have a responsibility to try and avoid conflict in that sense. But how much trouble do you think Sir Mark Rowley is in?
I think it's pretty bad. I mean, I don't really understand this argument that if you look at the whole 13 minutes, it presents a different context. I'm not quite sure what context exists where it's OK to say to somebody, you look openly Jewish. Mark Rowley, let's not forget, he came in because the Met had been shown to be in such a pickle or with so many bad apples over the Sarah Everard case. And he was promising root and branch reform. And I think if he can't show that leadership, then perhaps he should go. I mean, I think he should fix it and he should be given a chance to. But if it's not progressing, if they're not able to sort this out, then a problem exists.
All right, let's talk about this headline in BBC News. Conservative MP, now formerly Mark Menzies, MP quits Conservatives after claims he misused party funds. Yes, Mark Menzies was suspended from the Conservative Party earlier this week after claims, or last week, emerged in the Times that he had called a party activist in the early hours of the morning last December to ask for £5,000. Rosa, can you give us a bit more of the background to this?
Yeah, so the latest developments are that he has announced that he will not be standing at the election. He will not take the Conservative whip, and the Conservative Party have very rapidly, unusually, concluded their investigation already and said that nothing to see here because the money in question wasn't directly donated to the Conservative Party, but it was some kind of private fundraising, then they don't have an issue. The investigation seems to be quite narrowly drawn. However, there is a police, if not having yet launched an official investigation, the Labour Party have contacted them and asked them to look into it. And I wonder if the Conservatives will be able to draw a line and sort of ring-fence it and say it's a private matter, or whether it will rumble on.
Right, I mean, he has said, let me say in his statement, Mark Menzies, I strongly dispute the allegations put to me. I fully complied with all the rules for declarations. As there is an investigation ongoing, I will not be commenting further. But can the Conservative Party legitimately say 4 months on, because they've known about this since January, we know that now, 4 months on, that's it, we're washing our hands of it?
I'm finding it difficult to get excited about this story. I don't know what's...
You don't need to get excited, it's just about whether the Conservative Party really has done due diligence over this.
Well, if there's a police investigation, we should leave it up to the police to investigate. I'm not quite sure what he's alleged to have done, because he's denying anything. I don't even know if there's a police investigation. Look, I mean, I'll be blunt. I think politicians should live by a single set of standards. I think they should be high. And when they fail them, they should either be apologising, and if they break the law, they should be prosecuted. Same with Labour, same with Conservative. To be honest, the things that matter to my folks is not this issue about this MP, who I barely knew, unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever. And actually what people are really caring about is inflation rates, crime rates, job rates, and these are the things that are going to matter to people, not yet another trivial scandal, whether it's involving a Tory, whether it's involving Angela Rayner, whether it's involving anyone else.
Right. Jenny? I mean, the point is standards of behaviour are important to people from their elected representatives, but it happens in the Conservative Party in the way that it happens in the Labour Party, in fact, in all parties.
I don't think we've had anything quite like this. I mean, I do think that people are more concerned about their mortgage rates and about crime in their communities, absolutely. But there are questions here for the Tories to answer, because it does seem from a disgusted Tory activist who was phoned in the middle of the night to be asked for £5,000 by her MP, that she is not satisfied with the way that the Tory party handled this, to the point where, in desperation, she took this to the media, and now it would seem that there is to be some sort of investigation, potentially into fraud, from what I can understand, or embezzlement, because these were funds that were donated in order to be spent on political campaigning. And Mr Menzies would probably need to demonstrate that that is what was being done in this case, from what we know. So there are questions to be answered. I'm not making any allegations about this, but it does seem a bit odd that the Tories have investigated this very, very lightly and come to the conclusion they have so quickly.
Right. Do you agree it is and has been done lightly. I mean, there is also an issue
I
of transparency.
genuinely don't know, but I do find it
because
remarkable that Keir Starmer won't even look at the evidence against Angela Rayner, and we're being told that the Tories are doing things lightly. I think, frankly, the issue of Angela Rayner, who is potentially Deputy Prime Minister, is a rather more significant one.
We have discussed this at length.
Than Mark Menzies.
I just want to focus on Mark Menzies because
I do
that is
come back on Angela Rayner if that's okay, Joe, after Bob's finished, of course.
Yeah.
No, I'll crack on.
Go on.
No, you...
But, sorry, what were you going to ask me now?
Well, I was going to ask you, before you come back then, Jenny, on Angela Rayner, I was going to ask you about transparency. We now know that the Conservative Party have known about these allegations since January.
OK, I just genuinely don't know, but let me say, maybe there's a mental health involvement angle, maybe they were trying to sort of work things through in a voluntary kind of way, genuinely don't know. But the idea that there was a cover-up for 4 months, well, maybe, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know anything about this case until I read about it in the papers last week with you. Sorry, I find it difficult to enlighten you on something that I don't know about.
Should he stand down now?
Well, what's he been accused of?
Well, he's been accused of misusing party funds. He denies those allegations. I don't know, but it's quite a serious. But it's quite. No, I don't want anything. So don't put words into my mouth. He has been accused of something quite serious, something he denies. It was brought, as Jenny said, to the attention of the media. The Conservative Party obviously already knew about it, by the former campaign manager, who was called in the middle of the night to provide, she said, £5,000 in a matter of a life-death situation. Now he's stepping down. That's the end of it. Is that satisfactory?
If all sides are happy, it's satisfactory. If the police are going to continue their investigation, if they're going to charge him, maybe he should step down. Same with Angela Rayner. If she gets charged, maybe she should step down. Who knows?
She said she will.
Good.
I mean, that's the difference.
Step down as Deputy Prime Minister or step down as an MP?
That's the difference. Angela said that she'll step down if she's found to be guilty of a criminal offence. She's providing all the information. The Tories,
which Keir Starmer is refusing to look at.
It's not Keir Starmer's job to investigate. It's the police's job to investigate. Angela has done everything she's been asked to do. This is about the Tories desperate to find something that this woman has done wrong 10 years ago with where she may or may not have been living. They are all over it. They're getting hyperventilating when they find a neighbour who didn't get on with her.
It's about having same set of standards that you apply to yourself, that you apply to other people.
Yes.
The absolutely here is that Angela Rayner said to Boris Johnson the minute he was being investigated, he should stand down. And now that she's being investigated, yes, she did. She said that Boris Johnson should stand down when he was being investigated. She's now being investigated, and all of a sudden she's not willing to stand down, so she judges she judges herself by a different set of standards she judges other people. So I think that is a bad thing, and I think what people are fed up with... Let me just draw a line under it by saying that both Mark Menzies denies and refutes the allegations.
Fantastic. And Angela Rayner,
I think it's important that we all live by a single set of standards, and we don't judge other people by a different set of standards that we apply to ourselves.
I don't, and if I ever phoned a campaign manager who was 78 years old in the middle of the night and asked them for £5,000, I would be pretty harsh on myself.
Good luck. I'll give you a spade. So
all right.
Digging your dirt.
Let's talk about something that's serious as Bob Seeley. Well, you can't make a judgment on behalf of everybody, Bob.
Bob does like to make a judgment on other people.
All right. Well, let's not all have a go at Bob. We're going to talk about freedom of movement because there has been a suggestion, a proposal by the EU. We can see the response. UK rejects EU free movement for young people offer. And this is an offer that would make it easier for people aged between 18 and 30 to study and work in EU countries in the wake of Brexit. The European Commission has said the deal would be a limited arrangement, not a restoration of free movement. We're joined by Liz Saville-Roberts, Westminster leader of Plaid Cymru. Why do you like this proposal?
I think it offers some hope for young people, which, looking at the response of the two main parties, Labour and Tories alike, they're intent on denying young people any hope for the future. This is obviously opening negotiations, and I am disgusted with how Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer alike have just brushed this option aside.
Jenny?
Disgusted of Ceredigion. No, we don't have any plans to do this at the moment. We think we've just come through quite a turbulent time in relation with our, to do with our relationships with the EU. We don't think that this is a priority for us at the moment. There are lots of things that young people are concerned about, around their ability to get a house, about their secure tenancies, about crime. There are lots of things that young people are talking to us about. This, I have to say, isn't sort of one in the top flight of issues for young people that they're coming to us about right now. But, this is a proposal that's come from the EU. We don't have plans to go there, so I can't really say much more about it, Liz. But I understand this is something that Plaid have wanted for a long time, and they'll be very happy with it, and that's up to them.
Satisfied with that, Liz?
In all honesty, no, because this is an option that came last week. Young people do speak to me about how concerned they are, the lack of routes forward for them. These we're talking about here, the nations that are our nearest neighbours. People would be able to go there to study, they'd be able to go there to work. Now, I do see that this is only an option from the EU that offers for UK's young people to go to one country. I would expect it to be a broader offer than that. But also, besides young people, I really hear from hospitality employers, from retail, that this could be an answer to their prayers with shortage of staff as well. Now, of course, we need to carry on training people here, but primarily, what I don't understand is how both Labour and Tories alike think that appealing to an older generation, being so afraid to say anything that reopens the Brexit concerns, that is what's driving them. Where is the hope for younger generations there?
No, I mean, this isn't about fear or any of that. And I don't think there is a huge difference between the people that you're talking about, Liz, and what some older voters want. They want the best for their young people and the people in their families. Of course they do. But what we don't think is a good idea is to reopen this whole debate at this moment, having gone through years of turmoil over our relationship with the EU. There will be some negotiations forthcoming about the TCA when that comes up, and we've said what we want to achieve through that around a veterinary agreement and some issues about making trade more straightforward, and that you probably would support those things. But right now we just think reopening this whole issue of visas and movement of people, that's just not where the Labour Party wants to focus its attention at the moment.
What about you, Bob? Liz thinks it's disgusting too of both Tories and the Labour that you're not even looking at this proposal.
I think there's a balance. I think Liz makes a fair point, but the problem is here that there is a mandate, I think, in this country for getting down both illegal migration, which we've talked about, but also legal migration as well, because legal migration has been too high recently. We are aware of that. And so the problem is, if you're then saying, well, you can get people to come and work in hospitality, you're bringing in tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of migrants as well. And what we're trying to do is get control of a migration system which has been creaking, both since the effects of COVID, the effects of the Brexit as well, and getting that working. And actually the focus for me is not drawing in more young people to work in hospitality, but it's actually getting folks in my patch and throughout the country, getting them into well-paid jobs, getting them into apprenticeships. And actually the thing for me that I think the most important thing for young people in this country is really, really good apprentice training schemes to get folks into those jobs.
Right.
And actually that is my priority, not drawing in talented and capable workers from Poland, Romania and other countries coming here and actually taking those jobs, which are fantastically qualified for, and then having our own people idle. We need to get our own people into those jobs, and that's my priority.
Just before you respond, Liz, what's wrong with this proposal? Just when you look at it and you think young people, yes, to use Liz's words, hope that they could travel and study abroad, yes, it would be reciprocal. Is it really reopening freedom of movement?
Well, it's a freedom of movement in all but name, and it's always there. Young people are used as kind of emotional blackmail, have always been used as emotional blackmail in the Brexit debate. Why wouldn't you love young people to be able to travel internationally more easily? Well, of course. I'd like old people to be able to do it as well. You know, being a Brexit voter, as I was, doesn't mean you're anti-internationalist. But there's, if you look at the detail or lack of detail in this proposal, there's no real meat on the bones about, issues of dependence, which we know is a big deal for example, people coming over to study in universities. In terms of the numbers, there's no real detail on what kind of resources these people young people will come and get. And also there's the issue of if they'll be able to convert their visa to a right to remain. And hey presto, you've then got an issue which people care about, which is net migration. Now, it doesn't really matter what position you have. I have a much more liberal position on immigration numbers than some of my Brexit comrades. But the fact is, there is coming back to the D word, a democracy question here, which is that part of what people voted for in the Brexit vote was an idea of having control over your borders, whether it's the nonsense going on in the House of Commons and the Lords tonight over Rwanda or these kind of schemes. It feels like that control is being lost.
Liz, what do you say in response?
Of course, we know that immigration has never been higher into the United Kingdom, so it's very difficult to avoid this as being anything but a slap to the hopes of young people from the UK. Those are the people this could make a real difference to.
But
all the other arguments here, in all honesty, are playing back to those Brexit fears, and yet we put a blight on the future of future generations.
Well, I just don't think it does you any service to play in generational politics, and I'm not afraid of anything. But if you look at, for example, just the reality of this, across Europe, they're very good at teaching young people. They're much better at foreign languages than we are, and they all know English. You go to Germany or anywhere, they speak better English than I do, young people. And so it's the numbers coming into our country are much, much higher than kids or young people in the UK going out. Now, you might, whatever political opinion you have about that, logistically, that's worth noting. That's a stumbling block.
But it's an interesting proposal from the EU at this particular time. What do you think the motivation, apart from being cynical here, obviously, saying we'd like young people from the UK to come to the EU?
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating. So this came out of Brussels on Thursday. Labour slapped it down by Thursday evening. I think the government took till Friday morning before they did it. It's almost, not now, Ursula von der Leyen. We've got an election coming up. All the parties very quick to shut this down. They don't want to revisit the Brexit debate. I wonder if she was sort of floating a little kite there, and then perhaps she could come back to it in 6 months, a year's time, when the politics here may have changed quite drastically, and Jenny might have a different view on the matter.
Yes, Jenny, would you be warmly embracing this idea? If they didn't call it freedom of movement, if it's after the election, is this something you would like to look at?
You and I have spent many a happy lunchtime sitting at this desk, second-guessing what might be the motivation of things that come out of Brussels. And we've done it often enough to know that it's a fool's game, and I'm not going to start doing that now. All I can tell you is that that's not where the Labour Party is, and that's not where we want to be. We've got our priorities. They're published. We've had big arguments about them. They're very clear, and they're there for people to see. That's the limit of it.
Right.
I also wonder, though, if the Labour Party might be missing a trick. They're assuming that it would be a vote loser. Maybe young people would be quite up for it and
believe it or not, and you probably won't, but not everything that comes across our desk we look at and think, let's focus group this. How many votes does that bring? How many votes does that bring? We think that's a recipe for disaster for the country. And actually, we look at things in the round, and we'd want to do, when we look at young people and their opportunities, as I say, mostly they're interested in housing and in jobs and training at the moment. You've got to tie your migration policy to your skills policy, almost, dare I say it, kind of getting towards agreeing with Bob on that issue. That's how we want to look at things. We don't do piecemeal things that might be sort of gradually coming out of Brussels piece by piece to their agenda. It's got to be holistic, and it's got to be for the benefit of the UK.
I mean, there is already a youth mobility scheme, Ella, where visas you can get as a young person from countries like Australia, New Zealand and Canada to study or work, and that's reciprocal too.
Making arrangements like that, I don't think anyone has a problem with. But what if you boil this down to, this is, it feels like, yet again, using young people as a stage army for the Remainer argument, which, I hazard a guess is what's kind of behind Liz's enthusiasm at being disgusted by people not being on board with it. I think it's very unfair to sort of generalise young people's political views in that way. And actually, I think we should be, why are we so keen to shove them out of the country? I mean, why are we so keen to say to them, there's nothing for you here, look around your local area, it's rubbish, why don't you get lost?
Is that what you're saying, Liz? Is that what you're doing?
I look very much to my nearest neighbouring country in Wales. I look to Ireland, and I look to the experiences. Of course, Ireland has lost young people because of lack of opportunities over decades. It's also gained young people back who have gone abroad, had fantastic experiences, brought new skills and new outlooks there. I think we really need new skills and new outlooks in the UK. Listening to the conversation from the room in which I'm sitting, it is really depressing. Of course young people need to have hope. Of course we should be working closer with our nearest neighbours. This negotiation should be an opening point and not something that's just slapped down in the few weeks, the time that we're preparing for a general election. It really makes me despair of the quality of the politicians in our main party.
Selling the experience of Irish young people as over the years as being some kind of lovely jolly that they come up with new skills is completely misunderstanding the historical elements of forced migration in Ireland.
I'm afraid we haven't got time, Bob, to get you in at the end. That's all we have time for today. Thank you to all of my guests for joining me, including Liz Saville-Roberts. And I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 on BBC Two and the iPlayer. From all of us here, have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.